Hi everybody, happy Tuesday. My name is Matt. I am very privileged to be able to give the opening keynote for today. I have very tongue-twistingly titled this From Margins to Mainstream, Reframing Accessibility as Inclusion, but I will explain what that means. Before I begin though, very quick visual description. I'm a mid-30s mixed-race male wearing a navy blue t-shirt, jeans. I use a wheelchair. I have forgotten my socks and have an aversion to brushing my hair. And that's about it. My name is Matt Pierri. I'm the founder and CEO of Sociability. Sociability is a disability technology company. We help disabled people find accessible places by providing them with personalized, real-time accessibility information. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Because as I said, I'm really privileged and it's a real honor to be here in sunny Sydney to be able to give the opening keynote for today. As Pete alluded to, I have actually come from sunny London, which is a little bit far away and does always look like this. But it's well worth the journey. London is a great city, but has nothing on Sydney. I'm also excited to be back here because I actually, again, as Pete mentioned, originally from sunny Melbourne. And so therefore, I have been actually perpetually slightly underwhelmed by everything in Sydney, including the food and the coffee. But you can't win them all. That said, though, it is a real pleasure and privilege to be here at the remarkable Tech Summit to give the opening keynote, because I think the opening keynote has two really important roles and purposes. The first is simply to provide a little bit of pep post the politicians, so I'll do my best. The second, however, is to provide a bit more context to what's about to come to today, to provide a bit of a guide to some of the thoughts and ideas that we'll be talking about, that you'll be listening to provide some intellectual hooks upon which you can hang some of the learnings you're about to have, some insights to hope inception, some epiphanies and ideas that you might have later today. And so, in thinking about preparing for the conference today, I've been looking a lot at the branding. The branding's great. The focus for today's conference is to rewrite the future. It's to reimagine, to rebuild. And yesterday I had the privilege of joining a workshop where we thought about not just rewiring, but also reworking and remapping. And implicit, I think, is also a fourth kind of expectation, that of repeating. There's an expectation of repeating what you learned today, of taking these ideas beyond the purple lights of the town hall and helping to explain some of the ideas that we're going to be sharing today to people who perhaps haven't thought about these in as much detail or as thought as we have. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about a convening like this. It's to bring people to the room and to help spread the message more broadly. Now, repeating is not written anywhere, and so for those of you who might struggle to remember, I've come up with a small mnemonic device. When you're out and about in the streets and you're wondering, somebody says something about a disability, simply ask yourself, what would Pete do? And then repeat it. That is the end of my keynote. But in thinking about these things, rewiring, reworking, remapping, to me there was an implicit kind of understanding that actually what we're doing here today is reframing. It's taking concepts you've heard about and you know about disability, disability tech, disability inclusion, and trying to reimagine them, trying to rebuild them, trying to think about them in more progressive ways, particularly with the goal of bringing these ideas from the margin to the mainstream. And I really love this phrasing. I think actually anybody who works in the disability space, this should be the mission. Because our goal is to shift this understanding of disability, right? That most people have, that if you punch into an AI image generator, this is the conception of disability. And to remarkably revise it to something like this. A conception of disability is disabled joy, enthusiasm, creativity, innovation. These are real disabled people. I stole them from the website. And to that end, this is the ultimate message. How do we help take this outside and repeat it? But in doing so, and in thinking about what I could contribute today, I thought, reframing disability is a big task, and I only have 13 minutes left. And unlike the senators, I'm not able to go beyond. And so to that end, I thought, well, I might tell you a little bit about, I guess, my experience in the disability space. And in particular, the thing that I think most commonly needs to be reframed, which is actually this understanding of what is accessibility. But before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit what I do, because otherwise it will make less sense. So what is Sociability? Sociability, like I said, we are a platform that helps disabled people find accessible places, and perhaps more importantly, we help them find the peace of mind and confidence to go out into the world around them. We provide personalized, real-time accessibility information with a view to helping disabled people choose where they want to go. To know that they can move into a space and be comfortable getting in, moving around, using the toilet, and doing the thing that they want to do. Our goal is to help people stop searching for information, start socializing, start spending time with the people they love. We are based in the UK, but hopefully, depending on how the investment New South Wales conversation goes, looking to come back to Australia very soon. And in particular, we operate a platform that has 3 key parts. And that means that we're able to talk to users, to disabled people, to people with accessibility needs, to people who need this information, as well as to businesses, to organizations who are building the spaces and places and services that we need to invite disabled people to, as well as to platforms that sit in the middle of these layers, things like booking sites or navigation tools. And in doing so, we spend a lot of time listening to the disabled community, learning about what barriers they need to overcome, helping to create the tools they need to do so, and really making sure that we are building things for the disabled community and with the disabled community. We also spend a lot of time with organizations, large and small. We're very fortunate to work for everybody from small restaurants, cafes, and bars to some of the largest organizations out there to help them better think about what is accessibility, how to better understand it, how to communicate it, how to improve it. And in the last 5 years that we've been doing this work, the most common question that I get is, but aren't there rules for this? Aren't there laws that mean things have to be accessible? Aren't there regulations? Why do you exist when the law will solve this problem? Well, as a former recovering lawyer, I can tell you the law is not doing a good enough job in this space. And to that end, I think the real challenge here is that we conceptualize accessibility in the wrong way. We conceptualize accessibility as compliance. We conceptualize accessibility as paperwork, as a checklist. This image didn't work. That's meant to be a checklist. A checklist that you can set and forget, that you can tick off, that sits once and forever. And the problem with conceptualizing accessibility as compliance is that it leads to some really dangerous misconceptions around the whole point of accessibility and the ultimate goal of why we want to make things accessible. So I'm here to tell you today that we have been doing accessibility wrong, and that we need to reframe it, we need to reconceptualize it, we need to reimagine it, and in particular, we need to start to tackle some of these challenging misconceptions that are causing issues. The misconception that accessibility is a niche consideration. The misconception that accessibility is something that is external, that is imposed upon things after the fact. The misconception that accessibility is a constraint, is a limitation, is an obligation. Because these misconceptions are what keeps the understanding of disability in the margins and stops it from becoming mainstream. So I'm here to tell you today that we need to think about accessibility as beyond compliance. We need to think about it as inclusion, or as inclusive. And I'll tell you how we can do so. These are the hooks that I want to leave you with for today. But let's start at the beginning. So, what is accessibility? Before we start, like any good legal document, we will start with the definition. Accessibility, if you look at the dictionary, in a variety of dictionaries, is some sort of variation of the concept of being able to be reached. Okay, not particularly insightful. So I think this definition is slightly more helpful. It comes from the Interaction Design Foundation. The concept of accessibility basically deals with whether a product or a service or a place can be used by everyone however they encounter it, regardless of the ways in which they need to engage with it, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. And to that end, when we think about compliance, or we think about accessibility as compliance, we sell ourselves short. Because we conjure images of paperwork. We think about liability. We think about obligation. And almost invariably, we think about it as an afterthought. And this conception of accessibility leads to accessible accommodations like this. One door for the non-disabled people, and one door for the disabled people. Or a counter where you need to check in and report and disclose and warn people. Or supervision, where you can't get on the train by yourself. You need somebody to chaperone you, to supervise you, to make sure you're safe. This conception of accessibility as compliance fundamentally misses the intentional purpose and the people that should underpin how we think about accessibility. It sells itself short, and it creates dangerous limits on the ability to bring disability from the margins into the mainstream. So let's reimagine it. Let's start with the purpose. What is the purpose of accessibility? I was recently in New York, interesting city, and to that end, I checked myself into a nice hotel. I made sure it had a wheelchair-accessible shower, and when I got into the room after a long flight, and I thought, I should have a shower, I sat on the accessible shower bench. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture? You can shout it out because Brilliant. So I sat on the shower bench and I turned on the water and I realized the only way to get rid of my stench was to use the soap that was screwed into the wall on the other side. Now my arms are long, but they're not 1.5 meters long. So this bathroom is presumably compliant. It didn't particularly help me on that stinky Tuesday. I thought, okay, well, I'm in New York, I'll do some shopping. I love a good bargain. Not many bargains in New York. And to that end, I was walking around and I came across this Sandro shop. I thought, that's a nice jupe in the window. Let me go have a look. Unfortunately, stairs. That's all right, there's a sign. It's got a wheelchair. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture? That's right. The sign for the wheelchair, which says, press this doorbell, is unfortunately up the stairs. Now, again, potentially compliant, I'm not sure what the rules are in New York, but entirely unhelpful to me. Accessibility needs to be more than compliant, it needs to be functional. If we think about the purpose of accessibility to help people reach things, to access them, then we're thinking about allowing them to do things in the real world. When I turn up at this building, the fact that there's a lift is irrelevant to me if it's not working. I don't care that there's a lift because I have a penchant for lifts. I need the lift to allow me to come inside to have lunch with my friends. When I turn up to the supermarket, if there's a ramp that doesn't lead to anywhere, this is a supermarket in London, it's entirely irrelevant to me because I can't get inside to do my grocery shopping. So if we think about the purpose of accessibility, the obvious conclusion is that accessibility needs to be functional. Merely compliant is insufficient. It's unhelpful to me if I can't do the things that I want to do. But more than functional, we also want to think about not just the purpose, but the people associated with accessibility. And so if we think about the people associated with accessibility, if we think about the point that this is designed to help people be functional, then we have one further step. This is me. You'll need to use your imagination. Let's imagine I was recently invited to a disability tech conference in London. For some reason, I'm wearing my tuxedo. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it. There's lots of things happening. It's the London Town Hall. I turn up and the building looks great. There's lots of purple lights. I'm really excited to hear some brilliant ideas. And as I approach the front door, I realize there's a giant flight of stairs. I think that's weird. This is a disability tech conference. Why would they invite a wheelchair user to present when there's a giant flight of stairs at the front door? And somebody appears out of the bushes and they say, don't worry, Matt, there's a step-free entrance around the corner. Come with me. And I say, fantastic, accessibility rocks. And they take me around the corner and I go through a puddle and behind a bush and I end up in the garage area. And I wheel past the bins and I push past some oily streaks on the floor and I enter through the service entrance. My tuxedo is a little bit stained. It's not quite as fresh, but I think, okay, I'm hopefully getting inside. The service entrance leads to the kitchen. And I push past the kitchen, I sort of rough past the chef, I get splashed by some oil, I don't get offered any of the desserts, and all of a sudden, I'm not feeling particularly excited anymore, because I'm a bit dirty, I'm a bit smelly, it's been a bit gross, and no one else is coming this way. And so I end up inside the building, and they say, welcome, hope you enjoyed the step-free entrance, enjoy the conference. But I don't enjoy the conference, because I feel like this. I feel like I've been brought in to sit and look at the wall, to sit in the corner. I feel like I've been brought in as an afterthought. When we think about accessibility and its focus on people, we need to think about how we make them feel. We design buildings and spaces and places to impart an experience. The lights here won't magically appear. We put them here to make this place feel nice. We design environments to deliver an experience, to help places feel welcoming, to help people feel like they belong. And if we don't do the same when we think about accessibility, then we are underselling accessibility and underserving the people that accessibility impacts. So accessibility needs to be more than compliant. It needs to be more than functional. It needs to be inclusive. Accessibility that others is unhelpful. So if we are reframing accessibility as inclusive, then we are also able to start tackling these misconceptions. The misconceptions that I mentioned before, I think, are the most important ones to reframe. And so this is the final part before I am forced off the stage. Let's talk about accessibility as not niche. Accessibility, quite simply, impacts us all. The statistics tell a simple story. 1 in 5 people in Australia lives with a disability. On average, in Western countries, the number of people who are disabled is, well, one, both increasing, but two, 80% of people who are disabled have acquired that disability between the ages of 16 and 64. Most disabled people are not born disabled, they become disabled. And additionally, if we think about accessibility as beyond and broader than disability, there are also so many categories of people, so many categories of circumstance in which you will have accessibility needs even if you aren't disabled. The WHO estimates that at least 2.5 billion people worldwide, a conservative figure, have an accessibility need of some kind. What is the most obvious demographic who have accessibility needs that might not be considered disabled? The elderly. Brilliant. The longer you live, the more likely you need accessibility, and I hope you live a very long time. It's also important to remember that if we think about accessibility as the only minority group you can accidentally wake up in tomorrow, if 80% of people who are disabled weren't previously disabled, then it's important to remind ourselves that when we talk about disability, we should probably focus slightly less on the disabled and slightly more on the people, because disabled people come from everywhere and anywhere. So accessibility impacts us all, either today or tomorrow. The second is this understanding that accessibility is imposed. It's an external thing. It's something that needs to be done outside of your kind of everyday operation, as an afterthought. The most common example of this are old buildings. I spent a fair bit of time in the UK, in Oxford. I was very fortunate to study there. And in Oxford, there are a lot of old buildings. A lot of my time in Oxford was spent with this face, because nothing was designed for me. And for the most part, I kind of accepted it. When people said, sorry, this building's old, I just got, okay, well, at least I'm here. But it was in Oxford that I realized that accessibility is a choice. I was sitting one day in this old library, 600, 700 years old. And at the front of the library, there was a step. And so I couldn't get into the library by myself. I always had to ring a bell, and somebody had to come out and help me. And every time they said, sorry, the building's old. And every time I said, that's okay, thanks for letting me in. But one day I was sitting there on my laptop, and my laptop ran out of battery. So I thought, damn, I can't do my YouTube. And so I looked around, and I thought I need to plug my laptop in. And fortunately, conveniently, at the foot of my table was a PowerPoint. Oops. Was a PowerPoint. There's a PowerPoint. And actually, I opened the floor, I plugged my laptop into the PowerPoint, and I went back to work. Then I realized that every 2 meters along the floor, there was a PowerPoint drilled into the wooden floor. And I thought, that's weird, because like 600 years ago, I don't think there were PowerPoints. And then I looked around and I realized that every 2 meters along the wall, there had been lights drilled into the wooden walls of this 600-year-old library. I thought, that's weird. 600 years ago, I'm pretty sure there weren't lights in this library. And then I looked around and I realized I was sitting next to women and people of color and queer people and married people. And I thought, that's weird, because 600 years ago, none of these people were at Oxford. And I realized that the only thing that was still the same in this library 600 years later was the step. And so when they said to me, oh, we can't change the building because it's old, what they were doing was they were reframing the choice to exclude accessibility as something else. They were putting the responsibility on a non-human actor, on the building, because I couldn't go to the building and say, why aren't you accessible? It wouldn't answer back. And so it's important for us to remember that accessibility and the lack of accessibility is an active choice. It's not something externally or imposed. And the final part, to very briefly wrap up, is this understanding that accessibility is not a constraint, it's an opportunity. By definition, accessibility increases reach. And indeed, the history of innovation is very often tied to accessibility and to disability in a way that we don't understand. A lot of disability innovation, when it goes from the margins to the mainstream, rewrites history, and the disability element is removed. Look up the invention of the typewriter, the invention of the telephone, the invention of the touchscreen. All of these were invented for disabled people or by disabled people, but when they became widespread and popular, all of a sudden they are just innovation. It's called the curb cut effect. Accessibility improves access for everybody, and when it becomes mainstream, we just think of it as better design. So accessibility needs to be seen as innovation. And if we think about innovation, we need to incentivize it. We can't oblige it. So we need to move away from this idea of regulations and rules and compliance as the tool to drive innovation and think about how do we incentivize it so we can step away from the margins into the mainstream. So to that end, to very briefly summarize the hooks that I want to leave you with today, accessibility needs to go beyond compliance to inclusion. We need to think about accessibility as not niche, not imposed, not constrained, but as for all of us, as an active choice and as an opportunity for innovation. And if we can reframe accessibility in this way and step out to the world and repeat it more widely, then I'm really confident that we can push disability and disability inclusion from the margins to the mainstream, all the way from sunny Sydney to rainy London. If you want to get in touch, let me know. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening. It's been a real pleasure.